another episode of Phishing for Answers. Today is a very special day because guess what? It is Security Awareness Month. And we like to celebrate Security Awareness Month here at Phishing for Answers. Today we have Christopher Russell with us, who has a very long storied career in cybersecurity. I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit about how you got into cybersecurity in the first place.
Sure. So before I was in cybersecurity, I was in the military working on the intelligence side, the human intelligence side specifically. And towards the end, when we're doing a little bit more social engineering to get access to networks and systems, just seeing how abysmal internationally cybersecurity was, I thought, well, there's probably some job security in this line of work because no one's doing it particularly no one's doing it particularly well. And after I got tired of being deployed overseas for years and years and years, I decided to make that transition over to cybersecurity, come back home, and work on the corporate side.
Okay, and where's home?
Texas.
All right, what part of Texas are you in?
Just north of Dallas and Frisco.
Okay, that's a nice area if you can handle the traffic.
Well, I work from home, so the commute is like about 50 feet.
Oh, that's great. You know, I used to work from home, and then I decided to start my own company, and then I'm like, I need people to come in, so I'm such a hypocrite. Hey, it's really a pleasure to have you here today. Now, before we got started, you said you had a little bit of a funny story about an interesting phishing attack that you had recently.
Yeah, we talk about them getting more and more sophisticated, but the other day, one of my peers in my business, tZERO, he sent me some photos and he said he got some interesting mail that had some odd QR codes on it and things, and he knew there his alarms went up, but he's like, what did you make of this? And sure enough, someone is mailing out what looks like video game type coupons or something to where you scan it and it's going to give you some sort of presentation for this like startup or whatever. But it was malicious, in fact. And when I looked at the sort of presentation for this like startup or whatever, but it was malicious, in fact. And when I looked at the return address, it was some like Mormon church in Florida. So it was like the whole thing was completely sketchy. But yeah, instead of getting more sophisticated, they're returning the basics and doing snail mail for phishing.
That actually reminds me, one of the craziest phishing stories that I ever heard of. It happened early in my cybersecurity career. So I'd say probably 15 to 20 years ago now. But it was where somebody had hacked through fax. So they realized that they could fax these major registrars DNS change requests, and they wouldn't validate that the company actually owned the domain. And so they were able to hijack some major website. I forget which one it was. But yeah, I mean, that is something that I think a lot of people maybe don't realize, is that any communications channel can potentially be a means for phishing. So yeah, I love that story. It's been a while since I've seen any of that, for sure.
I'm not sure how effective it's going to be overall, but they're trying for sure.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how we could have a user report that phish. I don't have the technology right now. I'm gonna have to figure that one out. I joke, but yeah. So it is Security Awareness Month. Are you doing anything special this month?
I wouldn't say anything additional. We have our monthly training. We have our monthly phishing campaigns. But I do take a little bit extra time here and there when things pop up and do a little talk. Like I explained that scenario that I explained to you. I did that to the executive team, so they all understood that. And whenever there's a ramp up of we start getting additional texts or emails or whatever, I sit down and talk to them specifically by business unit about like why they're seeing what they're seeing and what it means. And then I'll go blow it up in the sandbox or whatever and explain what it would have done afterwards, just so they understand the why behind it, because it gets them engaged and then they feel like they're contributing and they kind of get into it. If you just tell them, yeah, just delete it, click it, like, don't worry about it, they kind of don't know what like bad looks like. So the more I can give them the context, I feel like the more they know, they start seeing what's wrong and what doesn't add up easier.
Yeah. That's actually a really common recurring theme on this show is make or start with why or tell them the why. Because it's really important that people understand that impact. I was talking to another ex-military guy. He goes by BZ, but Bob Fabian, who is the Navy Reserve cyber warfare commander, and that was what he was saying. You know, when they realize that it might impact their ability to get a mortgage, they start caring. When they realize it might impact their ability to get a car loan, they start caring. And I think that too often we get stuck in the technical and we forget about the actual impact, the tangible teeth of why does it matter to anybody, cybersecurity.
Yeah, I definitely, as Simon Sinek would say, start with why, because people are just told what to do. They do it, but if they don't understand why they're doing it, they're not going to do it to their full extent. Whereas if they understand the danger behind it, it's a lot more. There's a lot more emphasis on getting it right, I would say.
Yeah. So you said you did it by business unit. So I assume there's some sort of contextual or role based adaptations that you do based on what their role is and what types of threats they face. Would I be correct in that assumption?
Yeah, that's correct. Because what I've seen is that the people targeting the different business units attack them the way that they would see normal business communications, and they identify who's finance versus who's someone in a leadership position versus someone who's a developer, and they
Yeah.
try specific attacks. I would say it's not just I think that the old days of sending the whole company the same phishing thing is not really didn't
Yeah.
really work out. But if a smaller blast radius so it didn't get detected as easily to a couple people that they know work in a certain field and have certain placement access, it's a higher percentage shot.
Yeah, and I mean, okay, so one thing you pointed out that I think is so critical is that the bad guys are phishing us based on our role within the organization. They understand the hierarchy sometimes, what we do, and how that impacts our susceptibility. And you said that that old sort of one size fits all phishing doesn't work anymore. So, what are you doing? In terms of phishing simulations to really emulate those threats.
We choose campaigns that mimic the tools we actually have and the things people use. Sometimes we do things that are external, like your Netflix. We give them some easy ones, but a lot of times it's things we actually use and should expect. The DocuSigns and the your Google password's been changed. But more importantly, talking with them about like the ones that are not our campaign. When they do see them, I explain to them this is one sent specifically to finance or ops or DevOps or whatever. And the reason why they're sending it to you is because they want to get your credentials for this. Whereas
Yeah.
this one, they're sending it to you because they want to get in your email because they just want to monitor and then insert themselves. Like if you were like I've seen people in the mortgage business, they just get an email and they stay quiet. And as soon as an escrow payment comes in, they just go in and go, oh no, actually this is the actual ACH transfer bank account, sent it to this, and with in one fell swoop, it's possibly a couple $100,000.
Yeah.
So the training I keep pretty much consistent, so everyone gets a good basis. But whenever they come up and they get reported, the actual phishing, I explain why their particular business unit or them particular face a certain type of phishing, what they're going for.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I about a year and a half ago got a mortgage, and I was terrified of that. Man, I was double checking, triple checking every number, calling everybody. I mean, but it is very real, and that does happen where they do sit there and they wait. And it's not just on personal things like mortgages. I mean, we see it where they're in the controller's inbox and they sit there and they wait until somebody says, "Hey, can I send a wire?" And immediately they're in the middle of it. Sometimes they're just deleting the original one and putting their own in there so quickly that it appears as if that they're never going to see that it even changed. But it's definitely a major threat. Now,
Mhm.
one of the tactics that we've seen them be used quite a bit to pull off that business email compromise and bypass MFA is consent phishing, where they get you to authorize the API instead of actually giving away your credentials. Is
Mhm.
that something that you've been seeing?
It's not something I've seen, target my organization, but I've seen things like that, as well as, different types of social, not social media, different types of communication apps where they're trying to get in, steal session cookies or something like that. But yeah,
Makes sense.
there's definitely different means of them trying to collect, alternative means of bypassing, MFA or, whatever else you have in place.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the areas that people don't realize is that, they can get in and do just as much damage through that consent as they can if they actually have your username and password. It's practically the same. Um, so you mentioned DocuSign phishing. I see those sort of skyrocketing. Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah,
Where sometimes
yeah.
it's actually DocuSign that's being used as the
Yeah.
delivery
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean,
mechanism.
it comes from DocuSign. It comes
Yeah,
from the official DocuSign email, but within the email, you have to see who the original sender is. And, in some cases, that's easy to spot it, especially if it's a kind of a hokey, one-time email address. But sometimes, in certain businesses, if you're expecting random emails, especially legal ones from various outside parties that have Gmail, Hotmail, or whatnot, you wouldn't necessarily check that all the time. So it gets by a lot because people see they're just thinking of the original sender, being DocuSign, so it must be safe, and they're not realizing, well, anyone can get DocuSign to send off a document on their behalf.
yeah, yeah. And I think that that's one of those things that we have to make sure we're educating about. It's not just beware of phishing, but it's, hey, there are some very specific tactics that you need to be aware of, particularly when it is that legal department that expects a lot of contracts, that executive that's constantly getting contracts mailed to them. There's different roles where that is part of the day to day, and that's when it's more concerning and more threatening. And typically those are the people that have a lot of access too, so it's a double edged sword there.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because they're distracted. They're working on a million things. Everything's on a tight schedule. They're expecting DocuSign almost daily in certain departments. So it's really they really have the cards stacked against them when someone
Yeah.
slips in at that time. So, but
So, best practices in security awareness. Over the years, what are some of the things that you found work and that you'd recommend to your peers? Hey, if you're building out an awareness program, here are some things you should take into consideration or implement.
I think one of the foundational items is making people understand you're there to help and not to really punish them, because there is
I
a
like that.
stigma that I clicked on something, I'm in trouble, which it's not good. But you have to let them know, no, we're here to help. We're here to help you not click on things. And so the more you tell us, the more you report to us, the overshare. If you're not sure, communicate it, report it, whatever it is, and we will work with you on it. You're not a hassle. You're not problematic. You're not asked. This is what our job is, because this is a very used attack vector, and so we want to get it right. And you know, and making people understand where the security team is there to assist them, not to do their job and not get kind of taken off track. That I think that really helps when they feel like the security team is just kind of like behind this glass and just kind of watching them, and just kind of punishing
Yeah.
them. Then they don't participate, and what we want is active participation and thinking, and not just the punitive side of it. So
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I like that you brought that up because it seems to be one of the other really recurring things is that we have to build bridges, not barriers, with our community. They're all very intelligent in their own way, and just because they maybe don't understand cybersecurity certainly doesn't make them an idiot. Yet there's this, this mentality that has been prevalent inside of cybersecurity in the past, where with things like you can't patch stupid, where people truly do believe that, well, if you click on a fish, you're an idiot. And I really like that I see more people saying, no, that's not the case. They're our allies. They can be our biggest resource. We just have to treat them like that.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree with that, and I think what it is because it was such a prevalent attack vector, and we got used to saying humans are the weakest link. We kept in our head, well, they're going to continue to be that way, and there's nothing we can do about it. And although there's some truth to that, we're going to continue to be a weak link in that. You're not going to make it better by reinforcing it and demeaning people on it. What you got to do is, again, get them engaged, get them involved, and have them, like, just help them understand behind it. And you know, as good as training is out there with phishing, sometimes someone sitting down explaining to you one-on-one, or taking 5 minutes, or sending you an email back, oh, hey, thanks for sending that
Yeah.
phishing, thanks for reporting this. This is what it would have done. This was what it looked like. So if you accidentally do click it and then you do see these things, then you know something bad happened, like, get me involved again. But they know, if someone has their back, they're not afraid to report it. So, I
Oh,
just, that,
yeah.
yeah.
And praise them when they do report
Oh,
something and it's
yeah,
a real fish. Hey, that was a real attack targeting an organization.
yeah.
I like to quite literally call people cyber heroes. It's a way to drive better engagement, and it's just simply saying, "Hey, kudos, good job."
And
Um,
they get a little closure out of it if you explain, oh, here's a screenshot of what it did, and this was going to do bad things, and they kind of understand, they feel good about themselves. If you just report it and you're like, yeah, it's bad, we deleted it, and they're like, well, it just kind of, they don't understand the full picture yet. So I like to give all that context back so that they, A, feel like they're part of something, B, actually kind of, sometimes they're just interested in seeing what it would have been, and
yeah.
then, lastly, knowing, okay, well, if I did screw up, Chris explained that it was going to, be, ABCD was going to happen afterwards. So I'll keep an eye out for that too.
And I think it builds their confidence too.
Mm.
There's
Oh,
this behavioral science principle that I've seen happen a lot in cybersecurity, which is like the opposite of that, called learned helplessness. It's where somebody that is really good at, or let's just say novice or average or decent at spotting these phishing threats, then all of a sudden we run a simulation. But maybe we use inside knowledge that we wouldn't really have, and we, when we trick them, we check, we don't let them know that we're running a simulation. We just keep it on, and we send them to a login page, and they type in their credentials, and they never get that immediate, hey, this was a simulation. And then all of a sudden, they, a few times this happens, they get tricked and they start questioning whether or not they can actually detect these things. And that person that was really good at spotting them can actually become really bad at
yeah.
spotting them. And so, the opposite, where we can use those opportunities to say, hey, great job, you're actually really good at this, helps to mitigate that exposure and help to that user to do a lot better. Now, go ahead.
No, no, that's it.
So, on phishing, I can't tell you how many times over the years I have had people get upset. Have you ever had that happen? And if so, do you have any good stories about it? And then from there, what have you done to help mitigate that so that people don't get upset about phishing simulations?
I haven't really had people get upset, but I have had people who want to reach out and they kind of want to explain what happened because they feel like, again, they're in the middle of a million things. There's a perfect storm. They don't normally rush, and it was just like they literally, like, I don't normally click this, and they just they see themselves doing it before they said it. And I just, listen and talk about it and say, like, look, there's a reason why organizationally wide, through many organizations, the fish rate is a percentage. It's not zero consistently. It's anywhere between 1 and, maybe 15%, on any given good day, So there's a reason for that. So it doesn't make you a bad person, but, the whole point of this is to give you a starting point for training and some context and like a real life exercise.
Yeah.
But I do see the people don't want to be seen as like somehow less intelligent, or like somehow that they were duped, because some of these phishing campaigns are really close to the real thing, and unless you know how to look at maybe one or two abnormalities, and it's going to get a lot of people. So luckily, I've, the other thing is, not too many people try and get mad at me. I'm, not that I'm super intimidating, but I'm not someone that people typically yell at. But
Well,
um,
hopefully we're not making people so angry that they yell anyway.
yeah, yeah.
But no, I think that it there are all too many times where we end up tricking them, and maybe it's one of those things where, I think they get mad if they thought they got a raise and instead they might actually get fired. And it tends to be
Oh,
more in those very
yeah,
punitive environments
yeah.
where you see that type of
I
stuff.
don't I don't use a lot of templates like that. I've seen some really awful ones where like a company sent a phishing campaign that had to do like in line with, it was either like a line of promotions or some sort of like something good happened, and then like this is how you retrieved your gift, and it was like they really were going to get one, but the phishing people sent one in between. I wouldn't do something like that. I'm not saying it's not, it's not a realistic thing. It's possible the bad guys could find out that the company was about to do like Christmas bonuses or something like that and send something out like that. Um, but I've seen the reactions more on Twitter where people, found out that a
Yeah.
company did something like that. I tend to avoid that. But those are the types of things, again, I verbally explain when we get one that's similar to it. I say, now this is something, you would get around the, maybe around Christmas time, maybe around
Yeah.
bonus time, maybe if the company has any sort of thing that is possibly could be like public knowledge through social media, you got to expect there's a possibility you could see something, as far as a phishing attempt. So I tell a lot of people, even if it's not a phishing email, let's say it's a completely legit email, there's no links in it, there's nothing to download, you still have to be wary that the person on the other end is who they say they are and the whole thing isn't like a spoof thing. So I say, if we're worried about, like oh, for example, ICBC, that when they got hacked not too long ago, well, Deloitte, or like a subdivision of it, sent some emails out saying, hey, we're gonna like, we're part of the recovery crew for this, we're doing investigating it. And people were duplicating that and sending it to anyone that was a customer, and it was a phishing attempt, and
Oh
they were sending them,
no.
yeah, and they were sending them encrypted files that you couldn't even see, you couldn't even, until you unencrypted it, you couldn't like scan it or anything. So it was like a really, unfortunately, a good attack. But that's one of the ones where, it's like, well, this is something where you have to send it to your security guy and open in the sandbox to make sure.
Yeah. No, I definitely seen those sorts of scenarios, and I couldn't agree more that you really do have to be careful. Now, I will say I had a fish go viral one time because what we did was just evil. But penetration testing is, I think, a little bit different than the normal phishing simulations that we're running inside a company. Because in a penetration test, it's this one-time sort of I'm going in, I'm going to see if I can break in. And it's a very different goal than when I fish you on a regular basis. That fishing is for training to help prepare you and have you run through these things. And so I do think that one thing that gets forgotten sometimes is that before we run the phishing simulation, we have to ask what the goal is. Do we want to understand risk? Do we want to educate? Do we want to, what are we actually trying to accomplish? Because it does make a little bit of a difference, both in tactics and things like that. Because we had, already compromised somebody's email, and we sent a fish. Well, when we compromised the person's email, they were in HR, and we got all of these, or intercepted all of these emails that were asking about benefits. And so we send out this fish to a few hundred employees that says, hey, we're implementing a worst of both worlds benefits plan as part of this merger. And we put a Word document in there that said, hey, you have to, enable macros to decrypt, of course. And this thing goes viral. It was convincing enough because we had real actual text in there, because believe it or not, we found a company that had done this, and we found a real memo that we were able to copy. And so we send it, and it took zero time before shells start popping in. And like I said, we had sent it to just a few hundred people, I think right around 300. And within about 5 minutes, we've got over 1,000 shells on our command and control, or 1,000 connections back. We've got multiple Fortune 500 companies, a bunch of home computers. Now, this is way back in the day before we knew to tie our command and control to specific IP ranges. Some of us learned these lessons the hard way. But we had to shut down our command and control at 1,400 connections. And what had happened was that people started forwarding it to their significant others, their
Oh, wow.
spouses. Somebody, my favorite one was this one employee says, F this. And forwards it to the entire company-wide email
Oh,
distribution list. And this
oh,
is a large company, so now it hits just thousands of
oh,
computers, and
wow.
it just,
Wow.
yeah. But, if we can have that happen, it begs the question, how often do malicious emails go viral? I mean, you just mentioned one that basically went viral, and it was a very real fish. Um, so I don't know, just way distracted off subject squirrel moment, but I don't know. I mean, I think it's a really interesting thing. Have you ever heard of any other viral fish while we're on the subject?
I'm trying to think, but I know every time that I see one, I think it usually takes advantage of a particular psychological response. In that case, it was some probably extreme disgust, maybe, or extreme happiness, but it's usually something where it's not some sort of mundane business email. It's either something that's like things are going to get really bad or things are going to get really good. And that's when people they stop thinking quite as clearly, and they start having emotional responses. So if you can elicit an emotional response in an email, you're going to get people to not necessarily start looking at the sender right away. If right off the bat there's people like, especially if the headers, if the header was best worst of both worlds, right off the bat, people are like, "Oh, great, this does not look good," and their heart's pounding a little bit, and they know there's maybe mergers going on. So that emotional response is what gets people to kind of not, they get tunnel vision on the message, and anything like that can really quickly run rampant because it again, either really something great or really something bad, and causing that emotional response gets people to kind of not think clearly, and that's kind of the goal, I would say.
Oh, it absolutely is. In fact, almost all social engineering either relies on a mental shortcut or an emotional response or some combination of the two to get people to do what you want them to do. I know we used to do a lot of like physical assessments. Well, it'd be physical and network and social. It was just the full assessments, right? And one of our major clients were these professional sports teams. And so one of the ways that we would get in time and time again was to stage an argument as we're going through the security checkpoint. And if we were in a heated enough argument, we could walk through without anyone ever checking anything, because who wants to get in the middle of a couple fighting?
Yeah, yeah, that checks. Yeah, with my career formerly in human, like what we were trained to do was, we look at someone who has placement and access, we do a little digging, we find out what makes them tick, and then we craft some sort of message that they know is they're gonna respond to, whether it's they're looking for something that might get them more money. Like the reason why crypto scams and those kind of rug pulls, and some of them are just phishing and they steal your wallet, is people get excited about the fact of, oh, I might just make a lot of money easily,
Yeah.
and for the right person, they're going to risk. It's like gambling. They're just going to click that button.
Well,
Was Go
no,
ahead.
go ahead. I was just gonna like bring up the romance scams that are doing
Oh,
that, plus using love as a
oh,
mechanism to manipulate people.
yes, yes. I like to say people either like want to have things or want to be things, and when people want to be in love, they want to be in a relationship, they want to have that person, and yeah, the idea of that, people will make some really poor choices online, whether it's emails, Telegram. You'll just get texts randomly these days, and even though most people should know, there's no reason why out of nowhere someone that I've been able to find my entire life just pops up. The
Yeah.
idea is too enticing, and if it's one of those things that they're really motivated by, they're gonna, they're a couple times out of 10, they're gonna make the wrong choice.
Well, yeah, and I mean these romance scammers or pig butchers are very sophisticated. They have actual people. They'll do video chats with you. You know, they've got the people on the phones doing the text responses, but they've got the video people. They've got the phone people, and
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 they probably know a lot of the person's likes and dislikes, and they're, oh, I love, I love sushi, and I love,
yeah.
those types of movies. They do a little bit of digging. They, look at someone's history online, look at a couple social media posts. You kind of get a little bit of a, yeah, no, I did a whole talk on, people put all this stuff online, and you can read through someone's Twitter and Facebook, and you can get a little bit of a grasp of what their likes and interests are. And you can craft a really easily, persona of someone that would match their dating or love profile.
Oh, and you can guess passwords. It typically doesn't take that many guesses. I mean, like they say, well, I would never post my password online, but then they post a picture of their dog and the name of their dog, and they post pictures of their kids and the names of their kids and
And
the
when they were born.
and happy seventh birthday, and they don't think about the fact that saying that they're 7 years old on this day tells me exactly what their date of birth is, and yeah, I mean it's amazing, and particularly with our U.S. based population, because we really do not respect privacy in this country like we should, and I because of that, there's just so much that you can get about most people, and that they're just, don't forget about the fact that most people just volunteer it and sort of spew it out there and don't worry about the security settings on their profiles, and it makes them a target. And when you talk to these people, in fact, I was talking to the FBI the other day, and one of the things they were saying is that they come in and they say, well, but they didn't propose or bring the investment to me. I asked them if I could invest. And that's one of the things that people don't get, is they're going to bait you to where you think that you're the one asking for it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. They set up the whole scenario for you to ask ask to get defrauded. Yeah. Trust
Yeah.
me, that was my job for a while. I mean,
That was
not in a defrauding way. It was an intelligence gathering way. But the end of the day, a lot of the times I was asking people to do things that were not the best interests of their host nation.
yeah.
And they
Now,
wanted to do it.
I got a friend who is ex CIA. He was a chief of station, or retired now, and when he gives these talks, he uses the curling analogy, and he says, think of us as the brush in front of the thing. We manipulate the path in front of them to where they go exactly where we want them to go, versus us manipulating them. And I was like, wow, that's scary.
It's highly effective though. If you have if you have the resources, you have the information. It's really hard for people to withstand something that's designed specifically for their own motivations.
Yeah. Well, and that is the problem with these ransomware attacks, is that we're funding these operations every time we pay the ransom, and they just get more sophisticated. They get better resources. They get better technology.
They
And
have better margins. Some of the
oh,
largest groups make as much as CrowdStrike, but instead of having CrowdStrike's 80 to 60-80% margins, they're spending 3% on expenses, and the rest is just money.
I know, it's absolutely insane. But we can't always pay too, because one of the things that too many people find out too late is that if the Department of Treasury has labeled them a terrorist organization, have fun paying them.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, and aside from the phishing attempts and the different, I've been reading that they're starting to just reach out to people like developers and just offer them money to, hey, go put a back door on your environment. We'll pay you like 2 million in the ransom or whatever it is. And
Yeah.
and it's not as common, but people don't think that these groups have nation state type capabilities. But now that they're so well funded and the whole ecosystem is so commoditized, it's not going to take long for them to figure out, well, the phishing attempts and all these other means of trying to get people to click on things are only effective, but we need to make this work. So we're going to start doing more, elaborate ruses, and that can very easily involve human and social engineering. And if you ever see some of the pros demonstrate how quickly they can get into someone's system through tricking, their AT&T carrier or whatnot, it's all social engineering. It works almost every time for the people who know how to do it, and it's scary.
Yeah, no, I actually just recently published a cognitive bias index that goes through 183 different mental shortcuts that we regularly use in our decision-making process, how they are used against us, and how the bad guys actually utilize them. Now, I will say it's mostly just 25 different cognitive biases that are used again and again and again. But yeah, you're right that it's they know how to get us to do what we want to do. And when you listen to these things, it may just sound like a conversation, but that social engineer knows exactly what to or what to sort of play on to get that emotional, or to elicit that emotional response.
Yeah, no, 100%.
So I love this sort of line of things, but I will do want to dig into just some sort of specific methodologies. Um, well, actually, before we get there, what sort of KPIs should we be measuring to evaluate how successful our security awareness measures are?
I like to track the improvement. So I like to, have a baseline period of where we are when no one, when a particular skill or particular thing we're new at and we're not particularly good at, and then and track the improvement on it. I think that's
Now, the improvement, is that in reduction in phish click rate, or is that in like the testing and the increase in grade?
all the above. I think that
Okay.
I think the increase shows that the training is working. If you come in and everyone's already not clicking on things and already everything's already great, and then you just spend a whole year using your tools, and at the end of the year it's still zero, like that's great, like no problem. But the training didn't necessarily do anything for you at that point. But if you come in and you buy a new program or a new whatever, and you were at, like, let's say a 30% click rate, and people aren't finishing their training, and then by the end of it you're somewhere between 0 and 5% or 0 and 3%. I think that's a decent KPI to show that the training or the program actually works. Now,
Yeah.
there's going to be anomalies, and you have to adjust. You have to look at things a little bit. Sometimes a particular campaign can throw a lot of people off because it hit. You sent off a campaign, and then all of a sudden the company makes a decision, and that just fits right in with this is something that people are going to be looking for to click, and it. So you have to take that as an anomaly and not necessarily take that as we took a step back. But I think the improvement is a big piece of it. Obviously, the overall click rate is an important thing, but I like to track the improvement.
Yeah, no, I like that. For me, I think that we have two different types of KPIs. Really, in all things cybersecurity, it's not even just awareness. We've got those secondary and those primary KPIs. And so for the primary, I see those as like, are we reducing our number of incidents? Are we reducing our time to detection? Are we
Oh, the
reducing our
overall KPIs. I was talking
yeah.
just in a sense
Oh,
to the training and phishing, but yeah.
but yeah, inside of phishing, I think my favorite KPIs though are, phish click rate, of course. I think that gives you really good insight. But one of the ones that I like along that line is what percentage of those phish that I send out are actually being reported back to me.
Mhm.
Because I feel like that's an important metric that is equally important to sort of drive and push on within the organization. But yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, as far
So
as overall security, I would go with medium time to respond is the one I think I value the most, because um, I worked at an MDR, critical start, years ago, and we wanted to be able to respond within 15 minutes of that, like anything that happened for our customers. And I thought that was a really good, time, because the dwell time, the longer it goes, worse things happen. The shorter if someone gets in, if you get them out in 15 minutes, it's not great, but the chances are they didn't necessarily get everything and they weren't able to move laterally and get to where they want to be. So MTTR is the thing I really focus my people, where there's going to be a 0 day here and there. There's going to be a thing that gets by. There's going to be a WAF, bypass, but we detect it and we remediate it very fast, then we win.
I agree. Yeah, it's I think you have to assume the breach. We do everything we can to keep them from getting in, but at a certain point, you do have to assume that breach. And we want to mitigate it as quickly as possible. Make sure they can't spread around and propagate when they get in there. And I think you can count dollars in seconds, and the longer it takes, the more costly that breach is going to be. And you're right. In 15 minutes, the chances of them ransoming your data are slim to none. When that happens, they've already been in there for days or a week. I used to do this. It typically I'm not saying there weren't companies where we got in a day and had full control of everything in minutes. It happened, but more often than not, it would take us, the full 8 days to truly get in there. Now, we always got in, and it was in a fairly short period of time, but it takes time, even once you're in, to understand the network, understand who has access to what, understand the systems and who to target and where those privileges are. And even if I'm domain admin, it doesn't mean that I have access to your most critical servers. It just means I have access to get that information if I have time and patience to do it.
Yeah, and you want to be quiet too, because there's some tools out there, and if you just start a Nmap scam from some random box, it's going to get start using Mercats or whatever, it's going to get picked up. So
really, really quickly. So I found that everybody in this industry has that one pet peeve or soapbox, if you will. Do you have anything that if you were cyber god tomorrow, what would be your first action?
I would remove all of the paywalls for training that the vendors have.
Okay.
Because we have all these people trying to break into cyber.
Mm-hmm.
They'll get on Hack the Box, and they'll get on the free stuff and the stuff that's available, and they'll pay a little bit of money for it. But they don't have access to like the stuff that people need to actually run the tools that the blue team uses, which was where the majority of the jobs are.
Yeah.
And I've said this, and I'll be consistent with it. I want companies like Palo Alto and Fortinet. They have some free training, and that's great. It shouldn't be just for partners and just for people who want to be your professional services. Anyone who wants to configure a firewall should have the means of doing that and understanding how to do that. We need to just open all that up.
Well, the same thing with those SIMs. These enterprise SIMs are impossible to get your hands on if you're a new student trying to get into the industry.
Yeah, exactly. Splunk, big fan of that. And they have some entry level things which are great, but in order for somebody to get a job, they can't just have introduction to Splunk. They need to have 1 or 2 certifications that say I can run at least this part of it. I can do the query side of it, or I can do the back end side of it, or something. And that's what'll get people jobs. And not just jobs, but it'll actually show them and prove they can do part of the job day one. And that's what everyone wants, is to hire people that can actually do part of the job. So many people coming out of school. I mean, I got my bachelor's, master's, and working my PhD, but the schools don't teach you the technical side unless you happen to have one teacher that takes the time to set up a really fantastic lab. It's very rare. And so you come up with, contextually, this is how it works, and supposedly this is how it works. And they come in thinking that like you just put a firewall up and everything works. And it's a lot more complicated than that. And no one wants to hire that person if they can't really tell you how to do the basics of setting up maybe a VPN connection, or setting some policies, or or NAT rules, or things like that. And if we just got those in the hands of people that are trying to get jobs and had them study those, and we got it into schools, I think we could get more people into this industry faster.
Yeah, I think I mean, one of the things that really sticks out to me about that is that we need more hands-on training in schools, and we need more applicable training. I mean, I know my alma mater came to me and was asking for money, and I'm like, well, do you have a cyber program? Well, no. I was like, oh, then you're barking up the wrong tree. When are
Yeah.
you plan on getting one? And they're years away,
Yeah.
and I see this all over the place. There's some schools that are getting into it. They are developing curriculum, and I've seen some decent labs, but it's the exception, not the rule. And I think it's everywhere. If I'm learning about IT, I need to be learning about cybersecurity at the exact same time. If I'm learning about development, I need to be learning about cybersecurity.
Mhm.
And it needs to be more than an afterthought. It needs to be built into the core, because so many times it's the mistakes of the developers, it's the mistakes of the IT team that lead to utter compromise once the mistakes of the average user let the people into the network in the first place. So
Yeah, yeah, because you're learning development and you're doing the hard part. And one part of it is, okay, reference this image. And you just assume the image is fine because it's coming from, some, Red Hat or what, or Windows or whatever. You just assume the image is fine.
yeah,
You don't think you need to run that image through something to see if there's vulnerabilities on it already before
yeah,
you launch it. And as silly as that is, if just inserting that train of thought early on for developers of like, look, I understand you're writing the hard part in your code, but you have all these dependencies and all these libraries and all these things that have vulnerabilities in it that you don't know about. You just assume they're fine because they were handed to you by either the school or the program, whatever, but they're vulnerable out of the box, and not teaching them that that's the case really sets them up for failure when they go to work in real life.
but not just that, but I mean the amount of maintenance that they're not thinking about. Okay, I'm going to use jQuery. Well, great. Now I get to update my code libraries at least once a year to make sure that they're not outdated.
Yeah.
So I mean, we have to have these things, and I almost never see a software bill of materials, and that just goes back to that. If we start with security in the beginning of the education as opposed to an afterthought, I think it really changes not just our cyber teams, but our whole companies and our security posture. And so I think, yeah, we got to start younger, and not even in college. I mean, the threat is real. And when you look at the youngest people joining, well, let me ask you, as opposed to making the statement as a fact, do you find that some of your youngest people are also some of your least secure?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I think the younger generation doesn't has less of an understanding of how computers work because everything is app based on phones and iPads, and they're so used to that being their upbringing. Like even in schools, they're doing a lot of things with iPads, so they
Yeah,
don't have an idea of what really a file system is or a terminal prompt or anything like that. Which is, by the time you come to college, some of you may not be an expert in it, but you've seen it once or twice. You've had to
I
find.
would hope.
Well, you downloaded something and you had to go find it, and it was kind of a pain in the butt, but you learned it. Now it just goes to photos. That's just the way
Mhm.
it works. And so I've found with younger people, just them understanding on their laptop where things actually are and how they work, they don't have any of that, really at all, and it's kind of troubling.
Yeah, no, and I think there's almost a false sense of security too, where
Oh,
like,
yeah,
I've been on technology my whole life. Nothing's happened yet that you know of, but nothing's happened yet. Why do I need to worry about it?
yeah.
Um, and I think
Apple
it's,
built it. It's safe, right?
I mean, we've hacked Apple devices or networks before,
No,
and
yeah.
and
I
it
mean,
was harder, but we
yeah,
still got in. And I think the key point there is we still got in.
yeah. Oh,
It,
yeah.
it made our brains hurt, but we did get in.
But that's
So
the mentality. They just think, well, a really wealthy, competent company built this, so it's fine. I don't have anything to worry about.
yeah. Well, and let's not even get started on Android phones and systems. So, okay. So, before we end, it's Security Awareness Month. Do you have any tips for end users? Not necessarily the technical people, but those non technical people that might stumble across this podcast.
Sure.
Uh, what advice do you have for them in terms of just avoiding cyber threats?
Sure. So something I'm seeing that's happening to everyone, not just people in business, is a lot of kind of attacks via text. You just get a text from a random person that pretends like
Yeah,
they know you. And what they do is they add their name in the text. So either they pretend to be someone you know or they pretend to be someone else, but they always put their name in there. And the reason why they're doing that is because the iPhone is going to scan that. And the next time they text you, if you don't delete it, it's going to say,
possibly
maybe.
Sarah or whatever. Yeah,
Or sometimes it just says Sarah. And so once we start getting messages from people that our phone says a name for, we assume we know the person. We interact, our guard comes way down and we interact very differently. So I tell everyone, just delete it immediately. Don't wait for a follow-up text because you may forget and you may be busy later. You know you get a text from someone that's purporting to be your CEO to go buy gift cards, delete it immediately. Someone who you don't know, just delete it immediately. There's no benefit to keeping it because they're building up to something. They know what they're doing. There's a reason why they're doing this. There's a reason why they're putting their name in there. Is because they want to use the phone's natural functions for you to lower your guard later. Because maybe you do know a Sarah. Maybe you do know a Tom.
yeah,
You're not really paying attention. It says, sometimes it says possibly or maybe. Sometimes it just says Tom,
yeah.
calling or whatever it is, and you let your guard down, you respond to something real quick, or you click on something they sent you because it pops up, you don't look real quick, and then you're fished on the, and you're not even, it's not even a corporate thing, this is just your personal life gets affected.
Yeah, no, I've had it before where it does give me a name, and I've had to do a double take where, like, how do I know this person? And immediately questioning how it got in my address book, and then realizing, oh, it didn't. This is a new terrible feature from
A new
Apple.
terrible feature from Apple and Android and all these other phones and all that.
Yeah.
The AI piece they're trying to make our life easier with is, the bad guys are using that as an advantage for us to lower our guards.
They are, and I think the other thing is the romance scams we were talking about earlier. So many of these wrong number text scams are the hook to find you in the first place.
Oh yeah.
Hey, sorry, I meant to text a different friend of mine, but you seem like a nice person. Let's chat. And next thing you know, we're in love 3 weeks
Yeah.
later, 3 months later, whatever it takes.
I get about
And
I get about two of those a day, and then they immediately send a photo, and it's some like Asian supermodel, and I'm just like, this is ridiculous. I, I mean, it works though. It's just insane that it works, but it does.
It really does. But that's why we're here. That's why we're talking about these things. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on Fishing for Answers today. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. And once again,